Hi, everyone. Welcome to Maddox AI Plus Post Sales Summit. You are currently watching Build Your Own Internal Chatbot. I'm excited to introduce our speaker, Alex Turkovich, who is the Senior Director of Customer Experience at Belfry. Alex, I'm going to have you answer our icebreaker question, which is, what's one AI use case you wish existed, but you haven't seen yet?
It transcends from kind of the software realm into the physical realm because I would love a like an AI ice cream flavor generator where you prompt it based on the knowledge that you are the flavors that you like, and it spits out some ice cream for you.
Okay, I love that one. Very cool. Alex, I'll pass it over to you.
Sounds good. Hello, everyone. Hope you're doing well, and I'm excited to share what is actually an incredibly deep topic with you today. We could probably spend hours talking through this, but I'm going to try to give you a very quick whistle-stop tour and also leave some room for your questions and those kinds of things. So, just a bit of background. For me, I've been incredibly deep in artificial intelligence basically since ChatGPT, came out. And I was like, at the time, trying to test it out and seeing what I could and couldn't do with it, always trying to kind of break the bounds. And at the time, I remember thinking, this isn't quite there yet, but it's going to be soon. And I don't really know what there is, but I feel like there is kind of now. So, what I've been doing a lot recently is spending a lot of time just vibe coding things or really using Claude Code and a couple of the other vibe coding tools out there to just build apps. I lead the CX team at Belfry Software, and so we've built a whole host of CX specific micro SaaS apps for the teams, which is super cool. But on my own, I've been building a bunch of stuff as well. A lot of you might know that I host the Digital CX podcast. Been doing that for about 3 years now. And in that time, I've built up this wealth of just content and knowledge, either that I've shared on the show or that guests have come on and shared. And so there's all this knowledge that really wasn't being utilized outside of the podcast. And so I thought, what better way to use it than to build a knowledge base out of it and then build a chatbot on top of it, which is exactly what I've done. Um, and then it got me thinking about, okay, this is something that you could actually pick up and use in an organization. So, feeding all of your knowledge into a chatbot and having it be, maybe not even customer facing, but internal facing. So, what I'll do is I'm going to start with a few slides and I'm going to walk you through just kind of the thought process of getting to the point of this solution. If you've vibe coded before, and if you've used things like Lovable or Replit before, or even if you're a Claude Code user, this might be old hat. If you're not, this is the fundamentals of how to start getting into it. And I guarantee you, once you do, you'll never look back. But it might seem intimidating to you, but it's really not once you dig in. So, with that said, building a chatbot isn't like snapping your fingers. Let's not kid ourselves. It's a little bit complex, right? But we are in this era of software development where you don't necessarily need to be an expert to do it. You just need to be sleuthy enough and be smart enough in how you structure things and how you use artificial intelligence to be able to build this stuff effectively. So, no, it's not complex. And I've been vibe coding for a while, but I finally took the plunge about, I don't know, 6, 7 months ago in using Claude Code in a very deep way and really taught myself over the course of 3 or 4 months to use Claude Code in a way that I could, really just kind of build anything without a lot of guardrails. I used a lot of YouTube University to do it. There's one content creator specifically that I call out here. Her name is Sabrina Romanoff. If you don't follow her, she's incredible. If you want to learn about this kind of thing. But fundamentally, what I used the most to teach me how to use Claude Code was Claude and Claude Code. Because if you don't know how to do something, it will tell you how to do it. You just have to use real language and treat it like a personal assistant, basically. So that's kind of top tip number one here. If you're thinking about building your own apps and you're thinking about getting into this world, which I would highly recommend you do, um, use the tools around you to teach you how to use this stuff. So I will, this is kind of a mini vibe coding lesson here. So I will kind of run you through on a high level what to follow or the kind of process to follow. And then I'll actually show you what I built based off of that. So first off, if you're approaching a project without clear definition of problem, what you want the outcome to be, what you want to build at the end of that outcome, you might as well not start because you really need to have clarity on who you're serving, what you want to serve them with, what your goals are, what you want to include in your solution, like all that kind of stuff. You need to have some clarity around that, and really come to the table with a strong goal. You need to know, and we'll go through all of these stages in a little bit more detail here shortly. You need to know what your level is in terms of tooling and what tooling to use based on where you're at in your AI journey. Um, you need to have, in phase three, long conversations with artificial intelligence. I literally, most of the time, I spend more time up front than actually building the thing or building version one, having conversations with a Claude or a Gemini or a ChatGPT to make sure that there's absolute clarity in what's being built. And then you have it write the requirements document and you're off to the races. So for that first stage, you're really going to want to look at, what are you solving for? What do you want good to look like? And just building the foundation, because if you don't start there and you don't have a strong sense for what you want to end up with in your tooling, you're just not going to have great results, right? So really start with a clearly defined problem. Now, I took this from the person that I mentioned in the first couple of slides, Sabrina Romanoff. She has these four stages of kind of vibe coding proficiency, if you will, with stage one being very, very basic. You're using Google AI Studio, which is great if you're already in the Google ecosystem, using something like Base 44, which is a great kind of starter vibe coding tool. Stage two is you have a little bit more familiarity with it. You've done a few things, you've built a few projects, and this gives you a little bit more connectivity to your existing data, for instance. Some leaders here are Replit, Lovable. So if you've used those kinds of tools, you're definitely in stage two. Stage three is where you're using some of those vibe coding, uh, same kind of skills, but within an IDE, which is basically a developer platform. So one of my favorites is Google's Anti-Gravity because it releases some of the chains that you might have with some of the other tools. And then that highest level is Claude Code. I would not recommend you start with Claude Code if you're not familiar with that, but this is where essentially I've I kind of forced myself to quickly progress through all of these stages. So I'd love to hear from you, maybe in the chat, what stage you're at currently. And again, I'm kind of flying through this. We could spend a lot of time talking through this, but the final stages here, stage three, stage four, is the conversation. Before you even start to build anything, you're going to pull up your favorite tool and you're going to have deep conversations and have it interview you based on best practices, what you want to build. You're going to have it interview you about not just the functionality or what data you're going to feed it or how you're going to feed it. You're going to, you're going to have it ask you questions about the security parameters that you're working under, for instance, because I know for a lot of us that is a real thing. You may not have free reign to integrate with other systems, and there's ways around that, right? But you're essentially building the requirements for whatever tool that you're going to end up with. And once you have, once you can even ask it how confident it feels that it has a good picture of what it is you want to build. then you're going to have it build a product requirements document, otherwise known as a PRD, which is then what you're going to give your vibe coding tool to actually start building the thing. And if you do this, there's a couple of benefits here to doing all this work up front. The first benefit is you're not going to chug through AI tokens building stuff. Um, in fixing it later, you're going to have a solid requirement up front so that you're, using minimal token spend when it comes time to actually building this thing out. And you're going to end up with a much better version one than you would otherwise. Otherwise, if you don't do steps 3 and 4, you're going to be just fixing things forever, and it's not going to be a great experience. So take the time up front and build stuff. So what I'm going to do is actually flip over to another tab here and show you what I've built because it could be a good foundation for you on what you might want to build. But as I mentioned, I have all these podcast episodes, I have articles, I've got PDFs that I've put out. I have all these resources, and it was such a shame that they weren't being used. And so what I built first and foremost was essentially an ingestion engine. And again, I didn't know how to do this a few months ago. Like I asked, I worked with Claude Code to build this for me, but you'll see here that I can feed my tool, a podcast episode or a link to an article or, a raw document I can upload. I can do manual text. I can bulk import a bunch of things. So I've built, I've added these over time, but I'm able to add this content. And what happens once it's added is it shows up in my sources tab so I can quickly go and see, okay, these are all of the content sources that I have in the system. And the beautiful thing here is that I've built basically a vector database around this to where it takes all of my inputs and it chunks it into these bite-size knowledge chunks, if you will, stores it in a database so that then later a search query or a chatbot can easily reference those chunks of knowledge based on how it partitioned all of that. And so you'll see, for automation, for instance, if I go in here, I've got, it tells me what the chunk of knowledge is, what source content it came from, if it's a framework or a recommendation or an example. There's even an opinion category. So there's all kinds of different categorization that happens in the back end. And then ultimately, that leads us to this chat experience where you can, in this use case, what I wanted to do is give digital CX folks and leaders the ability to go and talk about their programs with a chatbot. And it's trained to be conversational and to challenge you on your assumptions based on what it is you want to build. So you can literally have a chat with it. I'm just going to use, some of the default suggestions here to show you. But it'll return, a fairly lengthy answer with some good opinions, but it will also then give you the sources from which it pulled that material so that you, if you really want to get into the weeds on something, you can go and, look at what those sources are and go back and listen to an episode or see a document from where it came from. So there's, it'll link you into that. So I'm showing you this as an example of what you can build. I think that there's tremendous value in doing this for your own organizations internally because you can own the knowledge, you can own where the knowledge lives, you can own what the tool experience is. And I have found this to be incredibly freeing. And like I said, I'm doing this for my own organization at Belfry because you can build the software experience that you want to build for your teams to make it as applicable as possible, as user-friendly as possible, as relevant as possible by taking control of this. And, when I say this came together quickly, I think this was maybe a week's worth of work to put it together over the course of, a few dedicated sessions. So it's not a ton of time to put these kinds of things together. Again, you just have to be very pointed with what the outcome is. and then ask it for recommendations on how to host it and where to host it and what the database should be and how to connect the thing. I'm not the most technically savvy, but when it comes to these kinds of things, if I don't know how to do something, I ask Claude Code and it tells me how to do something in plain English and very simple. So, like I said, this is an insanely deep topic. We could spend hours going through, the particulars of how this is hosted and how this came together. But I wanted to show this to you as a way of demonstrating that, you can build these kinds of tools very easily these days. I'd say the biggest challenge if you're operating in a corporate environment, especially, is what the security parameters and the hosting parameters and things like that are around this stuff with your organization. But by and large, there's ways to accomplish this, whether it's as detailed and deep as this is, or whether it's, via the existing Google ecosystem of tools. So if you're in a Google environment, you have access to a lot of these things with Google AI Studio, for instance, to start, putting experiences like this together. So that's really the nuts and bolts of how I've built this out. It was really just sessions with Claude Code. There are a lot of things that happen in the background that probably wouldn't be necessary for you. So, for instance, one of the things that it does is it takes the audio from my podcast and it transcribes the audio and then, chunks it up and those kinds of things. So there's all kinds of little tools that are running in the background that make this stuff happen. But if you're just building, a simple chatbot that's connected to a data source, that's the key, right? So whatever you train your data source on has to be solid. You have to have the documentation. You might as well not build a, chatbot if you don't have, the sources to back it up. And so for me, it just happens to be tons and tons and tons of podcast episodes that have a lot of different data in there and a lot of different, little takeaways and those kinds of things that have been, compiled into this wealth of knowledge. If you are strictly building a chatbot off of, let's say, knowledge base articles, that'll get you a good amount of the way there. The problem with that is a lot of times we don't have enough knowledge in our knowledge base to feed, a massive amount of, edge case scenarios and, different things that happen along the way. If you're building an internal chatbot, I would highly recommend that if it's not going to be customer facing, you point it at your internal resources and your internal, standard operating procedures, maybe a few Slack channels. There's ways to integrate that stuff to where questions have been answered before in conversations, but it's hard to go searching through Slack for some of those things. And again, this is just one example. So really map out where your knowledge lives and make sure that you have enough knowledge to do those kinds of things. Because if you don't, you're going to want to plug the knowledge gap first prior to actually putting something like this in place. This kind of solution should be in place once you have the necessary knowledge to feed it and, making sure that you have the tech stack to support it as well. If incidentally, if you want access to this, I'll put the link to it in the chat here shortly. It is a paid thing, but anybody who's here, I'll give you a free lifetime subscription so that you can go around, play with it, and if you're building a digital program, ask it lots of questions and try to break it and tell me how it's not working for you. Because, again, this stuff is iterative. You don't build this stuff in one shot. You add to it over time and you get people testing it and you get people kind of poking holes at it. And that's how something gets to be really good. And I've been fortunate to have a lot of beta testers on this already, have given me a lot of good feedback. But for you, if you're building something internally, your beta testers or your CSMs or your support reps or whoever that may be. Again, this is all this is all in the land of possibilities with artificial intelligence these days. And it has me pretty excited about, the coming few years. So I will stop there and see if y'all have any questions, because I know we just covered a whole lot of territory in a very short amount of time, and I'm sure there's something burning that you might want to ask.
Yeah, thank you so much, Alex. We have about 10 minutes left in the session. So if you have any questions for Alex, please go ahead and drop them into the Q&A box and I'll surface those for him. Alex, I'll kick off first. How often do you find yourself going back and like tweaking and optimizing this? And do you feel like the amount or quality of that has changed over time?
I have a problem. I'm constantly going back and tweaking. And that's the nature of this thing. You don't build this all in one go. You build little section by little section, and then you tweak as you go. You test it, and something doesn't work, or a color is off, or the logo is in the wrong place, or the font is wrong, or the chat responses aren't exactly what you want them to be. And so, you modify things as you go, a little by little, and I'll pop in there and just maybe once or twice a week, just make little modifications here and there. And sometimes that kind of causes a big distraction and leads me down to doing this stuff all night. So it's a bit of a problem for me.
Very cool. Thank you so much, Alex. I'll just give it 30 more seconds.
Mhm.
And if there are no other questions, then we can end the session early.
Maria asked if it was being recorded. Oh yeah, you already shared that.
Yep. All right. So that is the end of our session. As I said, the recording of the session will be available in our resource hub and we'll notify everyone once that's ready. Thank you to our wonderful speaker for joining us today, and thank you to everyone else for attending.
Christian actually just asked a
Oh,
question
yes.
um, in the chat in terms of how many I've built. I've built two chatbots so far. I've built this one, which, by the way, I'll put it in the kb.digitalcustomersuccess.com. I've built this one, and I've built one internally for our organization as well. So I've built kind of, this one on the side, so to speak, and then one for Belfry Software, my current employer. But then I've built just tons of micro SaaS apps for us internal. I basically started with a couple of different, individual SaaS apps, but then collected them all into basically a container. And I'm talking about, when I say that, it's like these edge case scenarios where none of our tech stack is really fitting the bill. We've created like a CSM renewal calculator, for instance. Um, I'm just going to put this here. Free subscription if you want to go do that. But we've built a renewal calculator. We've built a reference search tool, so you can go, and if you need to find a customer that's referenceable for a new prospect, for instance, you can do that. So we built all kinds of little things like that have really helped us as an org. So I'm always building these little micro SaaS apps. It's like my new obsession. So thanks for the question, Christian. How does my renewal calculator work? The way that it goes beyond what's out of the box is so we operate basically on 12-month, mostly 12-month agreements. Some of them are 24 and 36, but it's mostly 12 months. And so what it'll do is it'll automatically pull in the previous contract so that we can see what the pricing is and the unit volume and all that kind of stuff. It will also then pull in usage because we are a usage-based revenue model. So that way it'll, out of the box, without us having to do anything, it'll calculate what the overage is, for instance, is, because we do charge overage. And that then tees the CSM up to start to put together the deal for the next cycle. We typically do that like 120 days in advance. We kind of look at what the usage is and we start to look at, okay, is the base rate going to increase? Does their license count need to increase? Are there modules they're not currently using, but we have some signals for that? So they'll start to put the deal together in the renewal calculator. And then once they've done the calculation, it'll basically spit that out into our CRM as renewal notes. which is super helpful. So it's cut probably, I don't know, CSM's looking at renewals is probably cut half hour each off of it when we do kind of account planning. So awesome questions. Anything else? Thanks, Holly. Nice to see you.
All right. I think we can go ahead and end there. Thank you so much, Alex. Have a great rest of your